The summer of 1988 in Oak Ridge, Pennsylvania was unusually hot, and the kind of heat that sticks to your skin and doesn't let go, even after sunset. It was the type of summer where neighborhood kids would stay outside until their mothers called them home for dinner, their voices carrying across yards and streets. The type where teenage girls rode bikes with playing cards clipped to the spokes, creating a constant clicking sound as they pedaled through suburban streets. Among those teenage girls was Ellie Thornton, a 16-year-old with honey blonde hair that fell just past her shoulders and a spray of freckles across her nose that she desperately tried to hide with her mother's foundation. Ellie was known throughout Oak Ridge High School for her infectious laugh and her talent for photography. She carried her Polaroid camera everywhere, capturing moments that would otherwise be forgotten. June 17, 1988, began like any other summer day for Ellie. She woke up early, ate breakfast with her parents, and planned to meet her best friend, Jessica Palmer, at the lake that afternoon. Before leaving, she grabbed her trusty Polaroid camera, tucking it into the wicker basket attached to the handlebars of her blue Schwinn bicycle. Be home by 6, Ellie, her mother, Diana Thornton, called out as Ellie wheeled her bike down the driveway. "Dad's making his famous burgers tonight." Ellie turned and waved, her smile bright in the morning sunshine. "I will, Mum. Love you." Those were the last words Diana Thornton would hear from her daughter. When 6 o'clock came and went with no sign of Ellie, Diana wasn't immediately concerned. Teenagers often lost track of time, especially during summer vacation. By 7, she called Jessica's house, only to discover that Ellie had never arrived at their meeting spot by the lake. By 8 o'clock, Diana and her husband, Robert, were in their car, driving the route Ellie would have taken to the lake. They found nothing. No sign of their daughter or her distinctive blue bike. By 9, they had called the Oak Ridge Police Department to report their daughter missing. Officer Thomas Callahan took the report, but didn't seem particularly worried. "She's probably just lost track of time with some friends," he told the Thorntons. "Most runaways come back within 24 hours. "Ellie isn't a runaway," Robert insisted, his voice tight with suppressed fear. "Something's happened to her." Despite Robert's certainty, the police maintained that there was no evidence of foul play. Ellie was classified as a runaway, a designation that would hamper the investigation in the crucial early hours following her disappearance. The next morning, a search party consisting of neighbors, friends, and teachers from Oak Ridge High School gathered in the Thorntons' front yard. They spread out across town, combing through woods, parks, and alleyways, calling Ellie's name until their voices grew hoarse. Jessica Palmer, still in shock over her friend's disappearance, led a group of teenagers to the lake where she and Ellie were supposed to meet. She was so excited about taking pictures of the sunset over the water, Jessica told the police officers who eventually joined the search that she wouldn't just not show up. "That's not Ellie." As the day wore on, the search expanded. Local news stations picked up the story, broadcasting Ellie's school portrait to households across Pennsylvania. The photograph showed a smiling girl with bright eyes and a future ahead of her, a future that was now in question. 3 days after Ellie's disappearance, the police found her blue Schwinn bicycle abandoned in a ditch approximately 2 miles from her home, halfway to the lake. The discovery shifted the investigation from a potential runaway case to a possible abduction. The bicycle was intact, with no signs of an accident, but Ellie's Polaroid camera was missing from the basket. "We are treating this as a suspected abduction," Police Chief Walter Griffin announced at a press conference 5 days after Ellie vanished. "We urge anyone with information about Ellie Thornton's whereabouts to come forward immediately." Tips began flooding in, but none led to concrete evidence. A woman claimed to have seen a girl matching Ellie's description getting into a dark-colored van near the route to the lake, but couldn't provide a license plate number or a detailed description of the driver. A gas station attendant reported seeing a distressed teenage girl asking to use the phone on the evening of June 17th, but security footage revealed it wasn't Ellie. As days turned into weeks, the search for Ellie Thornton continued, but with diminishing resources. The case remained open, but active investigations slowed as other crimes demanded attention in the small police department. Diana and Robert Thornton refused to give up. They established a reward fund for information leading to their daughter's whereabouts. They appeared on local and eventually national news programs, pleading for Ellie's safe return. They distributed flyers with Ellie's photograph across the state, their faces growing more haggard with each passing day. "Someone knows something," Diana would say, her voice cracking during interviews. "Please, if you know anything about what happened to my daughter, come forward. We just want her home." Summer faded into fall, and Ellie's empty desk at Oak Ridge High School stood as a grim reminder of the tragedy that had befallen the community. Her friends left notes and small tokens on the desk, friendship bracelets, photographs, candy bars from the school vending machine that had been Ellie's favorite. By December 1988, 6 months after Ellie's disappearance, the case had gone cold. The Thorntons still held out hope, celebrating Ellie's 17th birthday in November with a small cake and a wrapped present that remained unopened on her bed. But the rest of Oak Ridge had begun to move on, the way small towns do when tragedy strikes. Ellie's name was mentioned less frequently, her story relegated to hushed conversations and the occasional anniversary mention in the local newspaper. Then, on May 15, 1989, nearly 11 months after Ellie vanished, something happened that would reignite the investigation and send shockwaves through not just Oak Ridge, but the entire country. A woman named Vivian Mercer was walking through the parking lot of a convenience store in Port Jefferson, New York, nearly 300 miles from Oak Ridge, when she noticed something on the ground next to her car. It was a Polaroid photograph, partially soiled from being stepped on and exposed to the elements. Vivian picked it up, intending to throw it away, but something about the image caught her attention. The Polaroid showed a young girl, bound and gagged, lying in what appeared to be the back of a vehicle. Her eyes were open wide with fear, staring directly at the camera. A copy of the previous day's newspaper was visible in the corner of the photograph, confirming it had been taken recently. Vivian immediately took the photograph to the Port Jefferson Police Department. Officer Gregory Hines recognized the potential significance of the discovery and contacted the FBI. Within 24 hours, the FBI had determined that the girl in the photograph bore a striking resemblance to Ellie Thornton. The agency contacted the Thorntons, who made the drive to New York to view the Polaroid. Diana Thornton collapsed upon seeing the photograph. "That's her," she sobbed, clinging to her husband. "That's my baby." Robert Thornton, his face ashen, pointed to a detail in the photograph that convinced him beyond doubt. "The bracelet on her wrist," he said quietly. "I gave it to her for her sweet 16. It's a family heirloom, my grandmother's." FBI agent Kathleen Donovan, who had been assigned to lead the investigation, studied the photograph under magnification. "The newspaper visible in the corner is dated May 14, 1989, she confirmed. "Which means Ellie was alive as recently as yesterday." The discovery of the Polaroid transformed the investigation. What had been a local missing persons case became a nationwide manhunt. The FBI established a task force dedicated to finding Ellie Thornton, analyzing every detail visible in the photograph for clues to her location. The Polaroid itself became a subject of intense scrutiny, and forensic experts determined that it had been taken with a camera matching the model of Ellie's missing Polaroid. The irony was chilling. Ellie may have been photographed with her own camera. The vehicle in which Ellie appeared to be held captive was identified as likely being a van or camper, based on the interior paneling visible in the image. The newspaper provided not only a date but a location. It was a copy of the New York Times, suggesting that Ellie and her captor had been in or near New York City the day before the Polaroid was discovered. As news of the Polaroid spread, more tips came flooding in. A nationwide hotline was established to handle the volume of calls. Among them was a report from a Port Jefferson gas station attendant who recalled seeing a man and what he described as a sick or sleeping girl in a dark blue van on the evening of May 14th. The attendant described the man as white, in his 40s, with a distinctive scar across his right cheek. This description matched a man who had been questioned briefly in the early days of Ellie's disappearance, Vernon Slater. a 43-year-old former maintenance worker at Oak Ridge High School who had been fired 3 months before Ellie vanished after several female students complained about his inappropriate behavior. Slater had been questioned as part of the routine investigation of school staff, but had provided an alibi for the day of Ellie's disappearance. He claimed to have been at a job interview in Pittsburgh, which had been verified by the potential employer. With this new information, investigators revisited Slater's alibi and discovered disturbing inconsistencies. The company where Slater claimed to have interviewed had records showing his interview had actually been the day before Ellie disappeared, not the day of. When confronted with this discrepancy during his initial questioning, Slater had produced a letter confirming the interview date, a letter that was now suspected to be forged. Furthermore, Slater had left Oak Ridge shortly after being questioned, supposedly to take a job in Ohio. Attempts to locate him at the address he had provided proved fruitless. Vernon Slater had vanished. A background check revealed that Slater had a juvenile record that had been sealed, a record that included an arrest for voyeurism and breaking and entering when he was 17. As an adult, he had no criminal record, but had moved frequently, never staying in one place for more than 2 years. "We are looking at a predator who's been flying under the radar for decades," Agent Donovan told her team. "The discovery of this Polaroid might be our first real chance to stop him." The FBI issued an all-points bulletin for Vernon Slater and his vehicle, described as a dark blue 1985 Dodge van. His photograph was circulated to law enforcement agencies across the country and broadcast on every major news network. The search for Ellie Thornton had become intertwined with the hunt for Vernon Slater. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the Polaroid continued, yielding additional clues. In the background of the image, partially obscured but still visible, was what appeared to be a roadside attraction sign. Enhancement of the image revealed partial text reading, "All's La, Ball of." The investigators determined this likely referred to one of several world's largest ball of twine attractions located throughout the Midwest. This suggested that at some point Slater had traveled with Ellie through the Midwest, possibly on his way to or from New York. And as the investigation expanded, another disturbing possibility emerged. Was Ellie Thornton the only victim? The sophistication of the abduction, the long-term captivity, and Slater's pattern of movement all suggested that he might have taken other girls before. FBI analysts began cross-referencing unsolved disappearances of teenage girls along Slater's known travel routes over the past decade. They identified 7 cases that shared similarities with Ellie's abduction. All involved girls between the ages of 14 and 17. All had disappeared while alone, and all had been classified initially as runaways. None of these girls had ever been found. The possibility that they were dealing with a serial abductor added urgency to an already desperate search. Every day that passed decreased the likelihood of finding Ellie alive, especially if the Polaroid had been deliberately dropped as some kind of twisted message or game. 2 weeks after the discovery of the Polaroid, another breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A motel owner in Caucus City, Kansas, home to one of the world's largest balls of twine, contacted the FBI after seeing Slater's photograph on the news. He reported that a man matching Slater's description had stayed at his motel for 3 nights in early April, traveling with what he had assumed was his teenage daughter. She seemed subdued, the motel owner recalled. Never spoke when he was around. "I thought maybe she was sick or something." He said they were on a father-daughter road trip to see Americana attractions. The motel owner provided security camera footage that clearly showed Slater and a girl who appeared to be Ellie entering and leaving their room. In the footage, Slater kept a firm grip on Ellie's arm at all times, and she kept her head down, her hair hanging forward to obscure her face. FBI agents descended on the motel, combing through the room where Slater and Ellie had stayed, even though it had been occupied by numerous guests since their departure. Luminol testing revealed traces of blood on the mattress, and DNA analysis would later confirm it matched Ellie's genetic profile obtained from her hairbrush at home. The motel owner also remembered something else. Slater had mentioned heading to Colorado next, to show his daughter the mountains. This information narrowed the search area considerably. Law enforcement agencies throughout Colorado were put on high alert, with particular attention to roadside motels and campgrounds where Slater might be staying. On June 2, 1989, almost exactly 1 year after Ellie's disappearance, a Colorado state trooper spotted a dark blue van with Ohio license plates parked at a scenic overlook in the Rocky Mountains. The trooper, who had been briefed on the Slater case that morning, approached the van cautiously. The van was empty, but through the windows, the trooper could see evidence that someone had been living in it: food wrappers, clothing, and most disturbingly, several Polaroid photographs scattered on the dashboard. The trooper called for backup before breaking into the vehicle. The photographs inside the van were horrifying. Dozens of Polaroids of Ellie and what appeared to be other young girls, all bound, many showing signs of abuse. A journal found under the driver's seat contained detailed entries dating back nearly 15 years, describing abductions, captivity, and worse. But there was no sign of Ellie or Slater. The search of the surrounding area revealed a hiking trail leading from the scenic overlook deeper into the mountains. Footprints indicated that 2 people had recently used the trail, a man and someone with smaller feet, possibly a teenage girl. As the sun began to set, a massive search operation was mobilized. Helicopters with thermal imaging swept the mountainside while ground teams with dogs followed the trail into the increasingly rugged terrain. The fading daylight added urgency to an already tense situation. Temperatures in the mountains would drop significantly overnight, and if Ellie was out there, possibly injured, exposure became a serious concern. 3 hours into the search, as darkness fell completely, one of the search dogs alerted near a steep ravine about 2 miles from the scenic overlook. Searchers carefully made their way down the rocky slope, where they found a small cave entrance partially hidden by brush. From inside the cave came a faint sound. Someone was crying. FBI agent Donovan, who had flown to Colorado immediately upon learning of the van's discovery, approached the cave entrance with her weapon drawn, flanked by local law enforcement officers. "Vernon Slater," she called out. "This is the FBI. We have the area surrounded. Come out with your hands visible." There was no response except for the continued sound of sobbing. After repeated attempts to communicate with whoever was inside the cave, agents made the decision to enter. What they found was not what any of them had expected. Ellie Thornton was alone in the cave, huddled against the back wall. Her clothes were dirty and torn, her body thin from months of captivity and neglect. But she was alive. There was no sign of Vernon Slater. As medical personnel attended to Ellie, Agent Donovan gently asked what had happened to Slater. "He brought me here yesterday," Ellie said, her voice hoarse from dehydration. "He said it was time for our final adventure. He took more pictures, made me pose with today's newspaper. Then he tied me up and left me here. He said someone would find me eventually or not." "Did he say where he was going?" Donovan asked. Ellie shook her head. "He just said he was moving on to someone new. That I was getting too old." Her voice broke on the last words, the horror of her captivity and Slater's implied threat to abduct another girl overwhelming her. As Ellie was airlifted to a hospital in Denver, the search for Vernon Slater intensified. His van contained evidence linking him to at least 5 other missing girls, none of whom had been found. The journal detailed his methodology, how he selected his victims, stalked them to learn their routines, orchestrated their abductions, and kept them isolated and dependent through a combination of fear, abuse, and occasional kindness. The discovery of Ellie Thornton alive after nearly a year in captivity was hailed as a miracle. Her reunion with her parents at the hospital in Denver was captured by news cameras, Diana and Robert Thornton embracing their daughter, all 3 sobbing with a mixture of joy, relief, and lingering trauma. But the story was far from over. Vernon Slater remained at large, and the evidence found in his van painted a picture of a predator who had been operating undetected for years, was traveling across the country with his victims hidden in plain sight. And now, it seemed, he was hunting for his next victim. And the nationwide manhunt for Slater escalated, his face appearing on television screens, newspapers, and post office walls across America. The public was warned that he was extremely dangerous and likely looking for another young girl to abduct. As Ellie began the long process of physical and psychological recovery, she worked with FBI sketch artists to create an updated image of Slater, accounting for any changes in his appearance since his employment at Oak Ridge High School. She also provided crucial details about his methods, his patterns, and most importantly, a list of locations he had mentioned wanting to visit, potential sites where he might seek his next victim. He likes tourist attractions, Ellie explained during her debriefing. Places where people are distracted, taking pictures, not paying attention to their surroundings. That's where he watches for girls who wander away from their families, even for just a minute. Based on this information, the FBI established surveillance at major tourist destinations throughout the country, focusing particularly on those Slater had mentioned to Ellie. Meanwhile, analysis of the journal found in Slater's van revealed a disturbing pattern. Each of his victims had been kept for approximately 1 year before being replaced. The final pages of the journal included detailed observations of several potential targets in different cities, including physical descriptions, routines, and notes on vulnerabilities that could be exploited. One entry, dated just 2 weeks before Ellie's rescue, described a perfect candidate in Santa Monica, California, a teenage girl who frequently visited the pier alone in the early evening to take photographs of the sunset. The entry included details about her schedule, her camera equipment, and even the route she took home. The FBI immediately contacted the Santa Monica Police Department, providing a description of the potential victim. Officers identified her as 15-year-old Amber Reyes, a high school sophomore with an interest in photography, a chilling echo of Ellie Thornton's own passion for Polaroid pictures. A protective surveillance operation was quickly established around Amber, without her or her family's knowledge, to avoid alarming Slater if he was already watching her. FBI agents and local police monitored the Santa Monica pier each evening, watching for any sign of Vernon Slater. 3 days into the surveillance operation, Officer Luis Mendoza noticed a man matching Slater's description sitting on a bench near the pier entrance, that seemingly focused on his newspaper but periodically glancing up at passers-by. The man had altered his appearance. His hair was now dyed black and he wore glasses, but the distinctive scar on his cheek was visible despite his attempt to cover it with makeup. Officer Mendoza alerted the rest of the team, and they prepared to approach the suspect. Just as they moved into position, Amber Reyes arrived at the pier, camera in hand, completely unaware of the drama unfolding around her. The suspect immediately folded his newspaper and stood, beginning to walk in Amber's direction. As he approached her, his hand slipped into his jacket pocket. FBI. Vernon Slater, freeze. Agent Donovan shouted, her weapon drawn as she emerged from her concealed position. What happened next would be debated in law enforcement circles for years to come. Slater pulled a knife from his pocket and lunged toward Amber, who stood frozen in shock. Officer Mendoza fired 2 shots, striking Slater in the chest. He collapsed just feet away from his intended victim, the knife clattering to the boardwalk beside him. Vernon Slater was pronounced dead at the scene. The 11-month manhunt was over, but the full extent of his crimes was just beginning to be understood. As investigators pieced together Slater's history using evidence from his van, his journal, and Ellie's testimony, and a picture emerged of a predator who had been active for at least 15 years, claiming victims across the country. The journal referenced 8 girls by first name only, with dates, locations, and disturbing details of their captivity. All of these 8, Ellie Thornton was the only one found alive. In the months following Slater's death, law enforcement agencies across the country reopened cold cases matching his methodology. Using information from his journal, they were able to identify and bring closure to the families of 5 of his victims. The remains of 3 girls were recovered from remote locations Slater had described in his writings. 2 others remained missing, their fates unknown but presumed tragic. For Ellie Thornton, the end of the manhunt marked the beginning of her long journey toward healing. She returned to Oak Ridge with her parents, where the community that had once given up hope now rallied around her recovery. The emotional scars of her ordeal would never completely fade, but with therapy and the unwavering support of her family, She gradually reclaimed her life. In a statement released through her parents on the one-year anniversary of her rescue, Ellie addressed the families of Slater's other victims, and "I carry your daughters with me every day. They were brave and strong until the end. I survived to tell their stories, and I promise they will not be forgotten." The Polaroid photograph found in that Port Jefferson parking lot, the image that had reignited the search and ultimately led to Ellie's rescue, became a potent symbol in discussions about missing children cases. It highlighted the importance of public awareness, the danger of dismissing teenage disappearances as runaways, and the tragic reality that some predators can operate undetected for years. Diana Thornton became an advocate for missing children, establishing the Ellie Thornton Foundation to support families of missing teenagers and to push for more resources dedicated to such cases. The Foundation's work led to several states revising their protocols for responding to reports of missing adolescents, thus eliminating the automatic runaway classification that had initially hampered the investigation into Ellie's disappearance. And as for the Polaroid camera that had been used to document so much suffering, Ellie's camera, stolen the day she vanished, it was never recovered. Investigators believed Slater had disposed of it after his escape from the cave, perhaps in one of the deep mountain lakes in the area. But the images it had produced remained, locked away in evidence rooms across the country, silent witnesses to a predator's crimes and to the resilience of the one victim who survived to tell her story. And somewhere in America, in a dusty evidence box in a forgotten corner of an FBI storage facility, the Polaroid that changed everything sits in a clear plastic evidence bag. A grim reminder of a case that began with a girl on a blue bicycle, heading to meet a friend on a hot summer day in 1988, and ended with a nationwide manhunt and a confrontation on a California pier nearly a year later. A reminder that sometimes justice comes from the smallest details, like a single Polaroid photograph dropped in a convenience store parking lot, perhaps by accident, perhaps as a twisted game. The photograph that led investigators down a long and winding path to rescue Ellie Thornton and end Vernon Slater's reign of terror. But for the families of Slater's other victims, those whose daughters never came home, justice feels incomplete. Their questions may never be fully answered, their grief never fully resolved. They are left with memories, photographs, and the cold comfort of knowing that the man who took their children can never harm another girl. And for Ellie Thornton, whose life was forever altered by a chance encounter on a summer day, the journey continues, one day at a time, one memory at a time, but reclaiming her story from the man who tried to make her just another entry in his journal of horrors. 5 years after Vernon Slater's death on the Santa Monica Pier, Ellie Thornton sat in a crowded lecture hall at the University of Pennsylvania. At 21, she had grown into a poised young woman, though shadows still lingered behind her eyes. Her honey blonde hair was now cut short, a practical bob that framed her face. The freckles she once tried to hide with her mother's foundation were now proudly visible. As a junior majoring in criminal psychology, Ellie was listening to FBI Special Agent Kathleen Donovan, the same agent who had found her in that Colorado cave, give a guest lecture on predatory behavior patterns. It was surreal, sitting among students who had no idea of her connection to the case study being presented. The Slater case represents one of the most methodical predators we have encountered, Agent Donovan was saying, her voice carrying across the hall. He maintained a nomadic lifestyle specifically designed to avoid detection, crossing state lines to complicate jurisdiction, and targeting victims he could initially classify as runaways. Ellie felt her heart racing as slides appeared on the screen behind Donovan timeline charts, maps with pins showing abduction locations, and evidence photographs carefully edited to protect the victims' identities. This was her story, clinically dissected for educational purposes. She had given permission for her case to be used this way, but experiencing it in this sterile academic setting was disorienting. The breakthrough came with a Polaroid photograph, Donovan continued, clicking to the next slide, a map showing Port Jefferson, New York. A seemingly random discovery that changed everything. Ellie's hand tightened around her pen. She knew what was coming next in the lecture. The photograph. Even with her face blurred out, she didn't want to see it. Didn't want to remember lying bound in the back of that van, staring into the lens of her own stolen camera, Slater's voice telling her to look scared for the picture. She hadn't needed to act. Just as Donovan was about to change slides, Ellie's phone vibrated in her pocket. Normally, she would never check messages during class, but grateful for the distraction, she glanced down at the screen. The text was from an unknown number. "I found something you lost." Ellie frowned, assuming it was a wrong number. She tucked the phone away and refocused on the lecture, where Donovan had moved on to discussing how the FBI had coordinated with local law enforcement across multiple states. 5 minutes later, her phone vibrated again. Same unknown number. "Your camera misses you, Ellie." A cold wave washed over her. No one called her Ellie anymore. She had started going by Eleanor when she entered college, a small way of reclaiming her identity, of separating herself from the girl in the headlines. Her hands trembled as she gathered her books, mumbling apologies as she squeezed past other students to the aisle. Donovan paused mid-sentence, her eyes meeting Ellie's briefly as the young woman hurried out of the lecture hall. In the empty corridor, Ellie leaned against the wall, breathing deeply the way her therapist had taught her. 5 counts in, hold for 3, 7 counts out. When her heart rate had slowed, she stared at the message again. "Your camera misses you, Ellie." Vernon Slater was dead. She had watched the medical examiner zip up the body bag herself, had insisted on seeing his face, needed that confirmation to begin healing. This had to be some cruel prank, someone who had recognized her from the news coverage. But who would know about the camera? Against her better judgment, she typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately, "A friend who knows the truth. Pier 39, tomorrow noon. Come alone or I send the photos to the press." Ellie's mind raced. Pier 39 was in San Francisco, clear across the country. There was no way she could get there by tomorrow. And what photos? All the Polaroids Slater had taken were in evidence lockup. Unless one was scary. Unless there were more. Unless someone else had them. Unless Vernon Slater hadn't worked alone. The possibility sent ice through her veins. That in 5 years of therapy, interviews, and investigation, no one had ever suggested Slater might have had an accomplice. His journal detailed his solitary methods, his disdain for potential partners who might complicate his activities. But what if they had all been wrong? Ellie's finger hovered over her contacts, ready to call Agent Donovan, who was literally just behind the doors of the lecture hall. That would be the sensible thing to do. The safe thing. The safe thing. Instead, she found herself walking rapidly toward the exit, pulling up the airline website on her phone. There was a red-eye flight to San Francisco leaving Philadelphia International at 10:45 p.m. If she hurried home to pack, she could make it. This was crazy. Reckless. Everything her therapist had warned against, making impulsive decisions when triggered, putting herself in potentially dangerous situations, keeping secrets from her support system. Yet something in her needed answers, needed to confront whatever this was directly. She had spent 5 years rebuilding her life, finding purpose in her studies, planning a career helping others who had experienced trauma. She couldn't risk having it all come crashing down because of leaked photographs or whatever other threats this person might make. 7 hours later, Ellie sat rigid in her window seat as the plane lifted off from Philadelphia. She had left a sealed letter in her apartment addressed to her parents, explaining where she had gone and why, with instructions to open it if they didn't hear from her by tomorrow night. A flimsy safety measure, but the best she could manage on short notice. She had also forwarded the text messages to her email, taking screenshots as backup. If this was some twisted trap, at least there would be a digital trail. As the plane chased the setting sun westward, Ellie tried to make sense of the situation. Could have Slater's photographs, who would know about her camera. The investigation had been thorough, the evidence carefully catalogued. Unless there had been things Slater kept elsewhere, a storage unit perhaps, a safety deposit box, or someone he trusted. The questions circled in her mind as the flight attendants served drinks and collected trash, as passengers around her watched movies or dozed under thin airline blankets. When exhaustion finally pulled her under, her dreams were filled with clicking camera shutters and the smell of developing Polaroid film. She landed in San Francisco at 1:37 a.m. local time, gritty-eyed and disoriented. The hotel she had booked near Fisherman's Wharf was small but clean, and she fell into bed fully clothed, setting multiple alarms to ensure she wouldn't oversleep. Morning came too quickly, grey light filtering through thin curtains. Ellie showered, trying to wash away both physical and mental fatigue, then dressed carefully jeans, sneakers she could run in if necessary, the light jacket with deep pockets where she had stowed pepper spray, and a small pocket knife. The fear she had worked so hard to overcome was back, whispering caution in her ear with every movement. She forced herself to eat breakfast at a nearby cafe, knowing she needed the energy, though every bite tasted like ash. By 11:30 she was walking along the waterfront toward Pier 39, tourist shops and restaurants coming to life around her. The normality of it all, families taking photos, street performers setting up, seagulls swooping for discarded food, felt surreal against the dread pooling in her stomach. As noon approached, Ellie positioned herself near the entrance to Pier 39, her back to a wall, watching the flow of people. Her phone vibrated. Like an sea lions. South Side. The famous Sea Lion docks. Of course, in a public place, crowded with tourists, but noisy enough that conversations couldn't be easily overheard. Whoever this was had chosen carefully. Ellie made her way through the pier, past shops selling sourdough bread and San Francisco sweatshirts, following signs to the Sea Lion viewing area. The briny smell grew stronger as she approached, along with the distinctive barking that echoed off the wooden planks. Tourists lined the railings, cameras raised to capture the hundreds of sea lions sprawled across floating docks. Ellie scanned the crowd, looking for anyone who seemed to be watching for her rather than the marine mammals. They are always performing, aren't they? Like they know they are being photographed. The voice came from beside her, female with a hint of a southern accent. Ellie turned to find a woman in her early 30s standing there, dark sunglasses obscuring her eyes, a baseball cap pulled low over brown hair. "You are not what I expected," the woman continued, not looking at Ellie but at the sea lions. "When I saw your lecture schedule online, I thought maybe you'd turned into one of those victims who builds their whole identity around what happened to them. But you seem normal." Ellie's mouth went dry. "Who are you?" The woman's mouth tightened. "My name is Judith Hanson now. But Vernon Slater knew me as Julie Anderson." "Julie," Ellie whispered, recognition flooding through her. "You are in his journal." "You were." His first, Judith nodded, still not making eye contact. 1975. I was 14. He kept me for 11 months before moving on to Debbie Reynolds. Ellie felt dizzy, gripping the railing for support. Julie Anderson had been listed as one of Slater's victims, presumed dead like most of the others. There had been no body, no closure for her family. And now here she was, alive, standing next to Ellie as tourists snapped photos and sea lions barked. "You are supposed to be dead," Ellie said, her voice barely audible over the noise. Judith gave a small, bitter laugh. "That was the deal. He let me go, but I had to disappear. New name, new state, never contact my family. If I did, he said he'd find me again. And I believed him." "Why are you coming forward now? After all this time?" Ellie asked. "That because of this." Judith reached into her purse and withdrew a manila envelope, handing it to Ellie. "I saw Agent Donovan was giving that lecture. I knew you'd be there. I have followed your story. We are connected, whether we want to be or not." Ellie took the envelope with trembling hands, opening it carefully. Inside was a stack of Polaroid photographs and a small notebook. The photos were faded but unmistakable girls, bound and frightened, each one dated and labeled on the white strip at the bottom. Slater's trophies. "1. Where did you get these?" Ellie whispered, fighting nausea. "He sent them to me," Judith said flatly. "Every year on the anniversary of my release. A reminder that he was still out there, that he could find me if I broke our deal. They stopped coming after he died. But then Ellie frowned, looking through the photographs again. Yes, Judith nodded, understanding the unspoken question. Until last month. She reached over and flipped to the last photograph in the stack. It was newer than the others, the colors more vibrant. The subject was a teenage girl with dark hair, lying on what appeared to be a motel bed, bound with duct tape, and the date stamp in the corner was from just 3 weeks ago. That's not possible, Ellie said, her voice rising with panic. Slater is dead. I watched the news coverage too, Judith said grimly. But someone is continuing his work, and they have access to his methods, his camera, possibly even his journal, since the pose is identical to how he photographed all of us. Ellie's mind raced, trying to process the implications. We need to take this to the FBI. Right now. That's why I contacted you, Judith said. I couldn't just walk into a field office with these. What if they think I'm involved somehow? But you have credibility. You have a relationship with Agent Donovan. Why didn't you just mail them anonymously? Judith's expression hardened. Because I'm done hiding. 15 years I have lived looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. If someone is out there continuing what Slater started, I want them found. And I want my life back. Ellie studied the woman beside her, seeing echoes of her own trauma and determination. The notebook. What's in it? Addresses, dates, names. I think they are places Slater stayed over the years. Hunting grounds. Judith finally turned to face Ellie directly. I have been mapping them against missing persons cases. There are more victims than the FBI knows about. Many more. Many more. The implication hit Ellie like a physical blow. The investigation had identified 8 victims, including herself and Judith. But if Judith was right, Slater's trail of destruction was far longer than anyone had realized. We need to call Donovan, Ellie repeated, pulling out her phone. She needs to see all of this. Wait, Judith grabbed her wrist. There's something else you should know. The new photograph, the girl with dark hair. I recognized the location. It's a motel in Tucson. I stayed there myself once, years ago. It has a distinctive bedspread. You think she might still be alive, and that she's being held there? Ellie's pulse quickened. It's possible. The photo is only 3 weeks old. Ellie stared at the photograph again, at the terror in the girl's eyes, the same terror she had felt, that Judith had felt. A fresh victim of a nightmare they had survived. We are calling Donovan, she said firmly, already dialing. But we are also booking flights to Tucson. Tonight. May 2. 18 hours later, Ellie and Judith sat in a rental car outside the Desert Palm Motel in Tucson, Arizona. The place was exactly as shabby as it appeared in the photograph, a single-story horseshoe of rooms surrounding a cracked parking lot, a neon sign missing several letters, and dusty palm trees providing meager shade. Agent Donovan and a team of FBI agents were positioned strategically around the property, having arrived on an earlier flight. After reviewing the evidence Judith had provided, Donovan had mobilized quickly, coordinating with the Tucson field office to set up the operation. Room 14, Donovan's voice came through the secure phone she had provided to Ellie. That's where the bedspread pattern matches. We have confirmed it's currently rented to a John Smith, paid in cash, been there about a month. Original, Judith muttered. No visual confirmation of the girl yet, Donovan continued. We are preparing to move in. Ellie gripped the armrest, her knuckles white. She and Judith were supposed to stay in the car, well away from potential danger, but every instinct screamed to be part of the rescue. To be there if when they found the girl from the photograph. Movement at the window, Donovan reported, her voice tense. Male subject, approximately 30 to 35 years old. Doesn't match Slater's physical description. And of course he wouldn't, Ellie thought. Slater was dead. This was someone else. Someone who had somehow obtained Slater's methods, his trophies, his camera. We are moving in. Stay in the vehicle. The next few minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. FBI agents converged on room 14 from multiple directions, weapons drawn. There was shouting, the splintering crack of the door being forced open, more shouting. Then, over the phone, Donovan's voice, suspect in custody. Room clear. No sign of the girl. Ellie's heart sank. Had they been wrong? Was the girl already gone, moved to another location? Or worse? Then wait. There's a door, bathroom is locked from the outside. Stand by. Bend. Ellie held her breath, Judith's hand finding hers in the space between the car seats, squeezing tightly. We found her, Donovan said finally. They're alive. Repeat, victim is alive and appears physically stable. Medical team moving in. Relief flooded through Ellie, so powerful she felt lightheaded. Beside her, Judith was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. They got her, Ellie whispered. They got her out. Hours later, Ellie sat in a conference room at the Tucson FBI field office, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in front of her. Across the table, Agent Donovan was reviewing notes from the initial interrogation of their suspect. His name is Peter Whiteley, Donovan said, sliding a photograph across the table. 32 years old, high school English teacher from Phoenix. Ellie studied the image of a nondescript man with thinning brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Nothing about him screamed predator, but then, that was often the case. What's his connection to Slater? She asked. Donovan sighed, rubbing her temples. That's where it gets complicated. Whiteley claims he never met Slater personally, says he was a fan who followed the case obsessively after it made national news. A fan, Ellie repeated, disgust evident in her voice. It gets worse. Whiteley was a true crime blogger who wrote extensively about serial predators. He somehow obtained items from a storage unit Slater had rented under an alias in Nevada. The unit went to auction after payments stopped. Whiteley recognized some items from case details that had been made at public and bought the whole lot, including the camera, Ellie said quietly. And my camera? Donovan nodded grimly. And copies of some of the photographs apparently, plus a handwritten manual of sorts detailing Slater's methodology. And he decided to, what? Become the next Slater? The idea made Ellie's skin crawl. In his words, he wanted to continue the legacy, Donovan said, not bothering to hide her revulsion. He's been stalking potential victims for months, using Slater's criteria. Megan Delgado is his first successful abduction. The girl from the motel, Ellie clarified. Is she? She's at the hospital now, being evaluated. Physically, she's dehydrated and has some defensive wounds, but nothing life-threatening. Psychologically, Donovan trailed off, not needing to complete the thought. I want to see her, Ellie said firmly. Donovan hesitated. Ellie, I'm not sure that's. She needs to see that survival is possible, Ellie insisted. That this doesn't have to define her entire life. But who better to show her that than me? After a long moment, Donovan nodded. I will arrange it. But first we need to talk about Judith Hanson. Ellie tensed. Judith was in another room, giving her statement to FBI agents. What about her? Why didn't she come forward before now? After Slater died. Fear, Ellie said simply. You don't just stop being afraid because the threat is gone. You live with it so long it becomes part of you. Donovan seemed to accept this, making a note in her file. The notebook she provided is proving invaluable. But we have already identified 3 locations that match with unsolved disappearances not previously connected to Slater. So there were more victims. Many more, it seems. We are looking at potentially 15 to 20 over a 20-year period. The number was staggering. Each one a life disrupted or destroyed, each with families left wondering what had happened to their daughters. What about the photographs Whiteley sent to Judith? Ellie asked. Why would he do that? To perpetuate fear, most likely. The same reason Slater did it. The control through terror. Donovan closed her folder. We will need both you and Judith to testify when this goes to trial. We will be there, Ellie said without hesitation. 2 days later, Ellie sat beside a hospital bed where 15-year-old Megan Delgado was propped up on pillows, her dark hair freshly washed, on her wrists bandaged where restraints had cut into her skin. I'm Ellie Thornton, Ellie said gently. But when I was your age, everyone called me Ellie. Recognition flickered in Megan's eyes. You are the one who got away from the original guy. Ellie nodded. Vernon Slater. Yes. The police told me. They said this guy, this teacher, was copying him, that he had pictures of you and other girls. Megan's voice was hoarse, uncertain. He did. And those pictures are scary, and they are always going to be part of our story, Ellie acknowledged. But they are not the whole story. Not even close. Megan studied her, seeming to take in Ellie's composed demeanor, her college sweatshirt, the quiet confidence she had worked so hard to rebuild. How do you get past it? You don't. Not completely, Ellie said honestly. But you integrate it. You build around it. You find meaning and purpose that's bigger than what happened to you. Tears welled in Megan's eyes. My mom keeps saying everything's going to go back to normal. But it's not, is it? No, Ellie said softly. But you will find a new normal. And it can be a good life, Megan. I promise you that. As they talked, Ellie shared parts of her journey, the therapy, the nightmares that gradually became less frequent, the decision to study criminal psychology, and the support groups that had been her lifeline in the early years after her rescue. There's someone else I want you to meet, Ellie said eventually, gesturing to the door where Judith stood waiting. This is Judith. She has an even longer story of survival than I do. The three of them talked until a nurse gently reminded them that Megan needed rest. As they prepared to leave, Megan reached for Ellie's hand. Will you come back tomorrow? Of course, Ellie promised. And the day after that, if you want. And next month, and next year. That's what survivors do. We show up for each other. In the corridor outside, Judith leaned against the wall, her expression thoughtful. You are good with her. You should consider adding counseling to your criminal psychology studies. Ellie smiled faintly. Maybe I will. Donovan tells me they are reopening investigations at every location in the notebook, Judith said as they walked toward the elevator. After all these years, those families might finally get answers. Because of you, Ellie pointed out. Because you kept those photographs, mapped the locations, made the connections. You could have burned it all, tried to forget. Judith shook her head. No, that's what he wanted, for me to live in fear and silence. Coming forward was the only way to truly be free of him. As they stepped into the elevator, Ellie thought about the journey ahead for Megan, the long road of healing, of reclaiming her life piece by piece. It wouldn't be easy, but she wouldn't walk it alone. The doors closed, and Ellie found herself studying her reflection in the polished metal. She barely resembled the frightened girl in those Polaroid photographs anymore. That she had rebuilt herself, not despite the trauma, but incorporating it, using it as fuel for her determination to help others. You know, she said to Judith, the Polaroid my parents gave me for my 16th birthday? The one Slater took. I never replaced it. Never took another photograph. I was rescued. Judith nodded, understanding. Some associations are too painful to reclaim. I think I'm ready now, though, Ellie continued, to take pictures again. To see the world through my own lens, not his. The elevator doors opened, revealing the hospital lobby bustling with life, families visiting loved ones, nurses changing shifts, doctors conferring in corners. Normal life continuing all around them. But maybe we could start a support network, Ellie suggested as they walked toward the exit. All for survivors of long-term abductions. There aren't many of us, but we understand things others can't. The Polaroid project, Judith said with the ghost of a smile, developing new perspectives from negative experiences. Ellie laughed, a genuine, unexpected sound that felt like another small victory. That's terrible. I love it. Outside, the Arizona sun was setting, painting the sky in dramatic streaks of orange and purple. Ellie stopped on the sidewalk, watching the colors change, allowing herself to simply exist in the moment. 5 years ago, when she had been rescued from that cave in Colorado, she couldn't have imagined standing here, having helped save another girl from a similar fate. Couldn't have pictured a day when the fear didn't constantly hover at the edges of her consciousness. Yet here she was, and there was Judith, who had survived even longer in silence. And now Megan, the newest member of their reluctant sisterhood, beginning her own journey toward healing. These survivors, connected by a predator's twisted obsession and a Polaroid camera that had captured their darkest moments. But the camera didn't own their stories. They did. They did. Tomorrow they would continue working with the FBI, helping to identify more of Slater's victims from the locations in Judith's notebook, ensuring that Peter Whiteley faced justice for his attempt to continue Slater's legacy. But for now, Ellie simply stood in the fading light, breathing deeply, feeling the warm breeze against her skin, and allowing herself to believe what she had told Megan, that survival was possible, that life continued, and that even the darkest experiences could lead to unexpected purpose. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, Ellie took out her phone and opened the camera app. She framed a shot of the colorful sky, her finger hovering over the button. After a moment's hesitation, she pressed it, capturing the moment not as a victim or a survivor, but simply as herself, Ellie Thornton, reclaiming one more piece of her life from the shadows of the past. The image would never develop in her hands like a Polaroid, would never make that distinctive clicking sound as it emerged from the camera. But it was hers, her perspective, her choice. And in the end, that was what mattered most, not the photographs that had been taken of her, but the ones she chose to take herself. Not the story that had been written for her, but the one she was writing now, day by day, frame by frame. 6 months later, a small gallery in Philadelphia hosted an unusual photography exhibit. Perspectives, reclaiming narrative through the lens, featured work by 3 photographers: Ellie Thornton, Judith Hansen, and Megan Delgado. Each collection told a story of transformation, of seeing the world anew after trauma. Eleanor's photographs focused on boundaries and thresholds, doorways, windows, gates standing open, inviting the viewer to step through. Judith's work examined the passage of time, weathered buildings, aging hands, ancient trees bearing the scars of lightning strikes yet still growing. Megan, the newest photographer, captured moments of human connection, strangers helping each other, children playing, hands intertwined. At the center of the exhibit stood a glass case containing a vintage Polaroid camera, not Ellie's original, which remained lost, but one identical to it. Beside it was a placard that told, in brief, factual terms, the story of Vernon Slater, his victims, in the Polaroid photographs that had both documented horror and ultimately led to rescue. The final line read, "The camera captures a single moment in time. But no single moment, no matter how dark, defines a life. We are all collections of countless photographs, some overexposed, some underexposed, some perfectly balanced. This exhibit honors those whose stories were temporarily stolen and celebrates the power of reclaiming narrative, one frame at a time." On opening night, Agent Kathleen Donovan stood before this display, a glass of wine in hand, watching as visitors moved through the gallery. When Eleanor approached, Donovan smiled warmly. "This is remarkable," she said, gesturing to the surrounding photographs. "All of it." "And?" Eleanor nodded, her own eyes taking in the crowd, Judith speaking with an art critic near her collection, Megan shyly accepting compliments from visitors, other parents hovering protectively nearby. "We have identified 12 of the 15 locations from Judith's notebook," Donovan said, her voice lower. "Recovered remains in 7 cases. Notifications to families are ongoing." "And they have answers now," Eleanor said, "after all these years." "Yes," Donovan hesitated, then added, "We found another storage unit. Las Vegas. More photographs, more notebooks. And it's extensive." Eleanor absorbed this, bracing for the wave of anxiety that would have overwhelmed her years ago. It came, but gentler now, manageable. More victims? Yes, and something else. Donovan met her eyes directly. Evidence suggesting Slater didn't always work alone. The implication hung between them. Peter Whiteley might not have been the first to try continuing Slater's legacy. There might have been others, recruited by Slater himself, trained in his methods, perhaps still out there. "So it's not over," Eleanor said quietly. "It's never entirely over," Donovan acknowledged. "But every predator we identify, every victim we find or prevent, every family that gets answers that matters. You have helped make that possible." Eleanor nodded, thinking of the young women whose remains had been recovered, whose families could finally hold proper funerals after decades of uncertainty. But Megan, who was healing, finding her voice through photography. Of Judith, who had emerged from 15 years of hiding to reclaim her identity. "I gave my statement to the Whiteley grand jury yesterday," Eleanor said. "They are expecting an indictment next week." "Good. He will never see freedom again." Donovan glanced at her watch. "I should let you get back to your guests. This is your night, after all." "Actually," Eleanor said, "there's something I wanted to show you first." She led Donovan to a small alcove at the back of the gallery, where a single photograph hung apart from the others. Unlike the rest of Eleanor's collection, this image wasn't of a threshold or boundary. It showed a blue bicycle leaning against a tree, sunlight filtering through leaves to create patterns on the ground beside it. "I bought it last month," Eleanor explained quietly. "The bicycle. Same model as the one I had when I was 16. I rode it to the park, took this picture, and then," she paused, gathering herself. "And then I just sat in the grass and felt the sun on my face. No fear, no looking over my shoulder, not just peace. Lies." Donovan studied the photograph, understanding its significance. "It's beautiful, Eleanor. Truly. I'm thinking of teaching a photography workshop," Eleanor continued, "for trauma survivors. Not just abduction cases, but anyone who needs to reclaim their narrative." "You'd be good at that," Donovan said. "Very good." "But Joe..." As they rejoined the main gallery, Eleanor caught sight of Jessica Palmer, her childhood friend, the one she had been biking to meet on that fateful day in 1988, moving through the crowd toward her. They had reconnected during Eleanor's junior year of college, rebuilding a friendship that had been interrupted by tragedy. "Your parents just arrived," Jessica said, squeezing Eleanor's arm affectionately. "They look so proud." Eleanor smiled, watching as Diana and Robert Thornton entered the gallery, older now but still standing tall, their faces lighting up as they spotted their daughter across the room. For them, for Jessica, for Judith and Megan, for the families of those who hadn't survived, for Agent Donovan, who had never stopped searching for answers, and for herself, Eleanor had created something meaningful from the broken pieces of a shattered adolescence. As she moved through the gallery to greet her parents, Eleanor caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass covering one of the photographs. She saw not the frightened girl from the Polaroid, not the cautious college student she had been 5 years ago, but a woman who had reclaimed her story and was helping others do the same. The Polaroid that had been found in that Port Jefferson parking lot had changed everything, had set in motion the events that led to her rescue, to Judith's emergence from hiding, to Megan's salvation, to the answers many families would finally receive. But it was not the end of the story. It was merely a frame in a much longer sequence, one that Eleanor Thornton continued to compose, one photograph one day, one moment at a time. And in the click of a camera shutter, in the gradual development of an image from darkness into light, she had found not just healing but purpose, not just survival but life, not just closure but a new beginning.